Ein herzliches Willkommen zum nächsten TechTalk hier vom Developer Garden auch und der Deutschen Telekom. Heute ein gemeinsames Event auch mit der Java User Group Darmstadt. Darf ich den Johannes auch begrüßen?
Ja, hallo. Herzlich willkommen. Wir freuen uns, dass der Joonas Zeit hat, dass er uns sogar nach Darmstadt kommt. Das ist toll. Und ja, ich wollte noch eine Sache von der Java User Group Darmstadt sagen, der hier in dieser Liste der zukünftigen Termine fällt. Wir hätten noch also ein Termin, der eigentlich leicht zu merken ist, am 13.12.2011 haben wir noch einen Termin zu JEE7 von der MSG Systems, kommt der Architekt und der wird uns das vorstellen, was da JEE7 und Cloud Computing zu Neues gibt. Aber jetzt ein anderes Thema und das ist praktisch Vaadin, genau.
Danke, Johannes. Vielleicht noch ein paar Themen auch zu den nächsten Talks, habe ich wie immer aufgelistet auch. Heute zum Thema Vaadin. Freut uns besonders, dass wir einen Gast aus weiter Ferne, Joonas von Finnland, auch bei uns begrüßen können. Dann haben wir am 24. einen Talk in Berlin zum Thema DevOps. Wie bringe ich den Betrieb und Operations zusammen? Das finde ich ein sehr spannendes Thema. Dann haben wir kurzfristig noch einen Termin vereinbaren können hier in Darmstadt zum Thema ZFS. Da wird ein Speicherspezialist von Oracle, ehemals Sun, auch drüber etwas erzählen. Und dann haben wir noch zwei Themen geplant, die wir leider noch nicht terminieren können. Einmal Kinect, das wird vielleicht in Berlin sein, sind wir noch gerade in der Abstimmung. Und noch zum Thema Ajax Performance Optimierung. Das wird ein Thema so ein bisschen hier reinpassen auch. Gut, ansonsten, weiß ich, habt ihr heute wieder euer Schwein dabei für Spenden?
Leider halt nicht.
Okay, vielleicht können wir irgendwie vorne einen Teller hinstellen dann. Die Java User Group, die organisiert immer auch für einen karitativen Zweck im Prinzip, wird ein bisschen Geld gesammelt auch, und was dann anstelle von irgendwelchen Beiträgen auch dafür verwendet wird dann. Okay, now we should switch to English. So I'd like to welcome Joonas Lehtinen from the company Vaadin.
Thank you.
And he will give us some insights about a rich Internet Applications Framework. So I wish you a pleasure here and to hear interesting things about Ajax technology. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, great to be here. Just a second, I'll just stop at the slides. Okay, my name is Joonas Lehtinen, I'm from Vaadin team. We are in Finland and building rich web framework. And today I'm going to speak both about rich web applications in general and more specifically Vaadin-Framework, how it's working. But before that, a question. How many of you have been using Vaadin already? Quite a few. How many of you know what is Vaadin? You think you know what is Vaadin? It's actually a reindeer. It's a Finnish word. It means female reindeer. And if you are looking at the logo this way, it's kind of head of the reindeer. But you should probably be defining it like it's a framework for building desktop-like user interfaces. And emphasis is desktop-like, but still they are running on the web without any kind of plugins or that kind of stuff. And always when I'm kind of speaking about frameworks, people start to turn this way. Hey, there is already 143 Java web frameworks out there. Why do we have to hear of yet another framework? And the question is, what should I learn? Should I learn new tag libs? Should I learn some kind of client-side JavaScript APIs? Is there some kind of XML declaration I have to learn? Or what's the kind of learning curve, and what's the way of using that framework? And this is kind of solely built around Java. So you're only building your applications in Java language, and you don't have to worry about XML or JavaScript or web at all. It's kind of automatic from that respect. So you could actually see the logo in such a way that it kind of hides HTML things behind Java. So it's kind of curly brace for Java and bracket for kind of greater than symbol for HTML tags. A bit of history of framework. So we started, or I started actually doing web stuff in a healthcare portal project that built I think it was the first internet-based healthcare system for consultations in Europe. And we built quite huge web application, around 100,000 or 200,000 lines of Perl code running on top of DB2 on Linux. And the development team started to look like this, basically kind of script coding and maintaining all the code base, not only on the server side, the shell code is horrible to maintain, but the client side, kind of maintaining all the different browsers, like IE5 and Netscape and that kind of old browser, it became really complicated. So we started thinking that there must be some kind of better way of handling the UI part of the development cycle. And we started kind of looking around what could be a good concept to kind of build a new framework on. And we started looking at desktop, and there was quite mature ways of building UIs out of components on desktop. So in the end, we kind of decided to copy the desktop programming paradigm to web. And we started a company around it and started building the framework already in the year 2000. The first version came out as an internal product in 2001, and then we released it as an open source product in 2002. But we put a really bad name for it. We named it Millstone, and the Millstone, we wanted it to be kind of a lightweight web framework, and Millstone sounds a bit heavy to begin with, so it wasn't a marketing success at all. But we didn't give up. We kind of added Ajax support, we added Google Web Toolkit when it came out, and in the end we kind of released the whole thing with the new name Vaadin in 2009. And actually, people have been starting to hear about framework only after 2009 for some reason. But it has a kind of 10-year history behind it. So when you hear somebody pitching about their technology, you always have to kind of start asking what this guy is trying to sell to you. Is there some kind of hook inside the technology that this guy is trying to sell to you? And in this case, it's actually a really good case because it's fully Apache licensed, so you can use it freely for anything. So there is nothing I try to sell to you. We have been kind of going around in different conferences and expos, and the mission for there is a whole company behind Vaadin-Framework, and the marketing side of the company that has set the mission to be kind of catching the souls of the developers with this Vaadin thing. And it has been going quite nicely because it's fully free for developers to use to any purposes. So what I'm going to speak about is first a bit server-side rich internet applications, then show a demo live how to code with Vaadin, how a server-side RIA development model could look like, and then show what's kind of inside the box, how it actually works behind the scenes. And I hope that we have a lot of questions in the end. So server-side RIA, you always have to define what are rich internet applications. Even it's quite naive to ask what are rich internet applications. Everybody knows that. But there is kind of favorite definitions for rich internet applications. This is actually fully true. If you kind of start thinking how much it takes to write those applications and kind of tune all the JavaScript and do all the browser, work around all the browser differences, it's quite worksome. So if you're looking at the thing from the architectural point of view, you could first look at the Web 1.0 type of way. So basically we have a web browser that fetches pages from the server side, and all the MVC, all the data and the logic sits on the server side. Browser is just a kind of stupid client showing the pages and sending more requests and fetching more pages. Quite trivial model and quite good in what it's doing. So then came along rich internet applications, kind of fat clients for web. So they actually moved the view and the controller side, the view and the controller to the client side. And this is actually a really good thing. You can get a really, really interactive application by kind of doing everything on the client side and only going back to the server side when you need more data. So we built the whole application in JavaScript within the web browser, and it kind of moves a lot of code to the client side. But the challenge is that if you are kind of doing a lot of coding on the client side, you are starting to have quite large code base on the client side, maybe tens of thousands of lines of JavaScript code or 100,000 lines of JavaScript code. It becomes like really, really hard in the end. kind of adding some JavaScript on top of web pages is really, really easy. But if you have large chunk of JavaScript, just maybe a couple of thousand lines are enough to make it quite hard to maintain and build. And there are 3 reasons for that. First of all, the browsers are quite different from the feature point of view. You cannot expect all the features to be the same in different browsers. And the performance profiles are hugely different. So if you are trying to support IE6, for example, then you have to make sure that your application runs in 100 times slower browser than Chrome. And it's a kind of, either you choose to only include some features to make it good for IE6 and leave, don't use all the power in Chrome, or you target for Chrome and doesn't really run in IE6. But the biggest thing is that there are bugs between those browsers. So if you are implementing something in one browser, you cannot always expect it to work in the similar fashion in other browser. And you end up kind of using large part of your project debugging the browser differences, debugging why this thing doesn't run in the same way in this browser while it was running in my other browser. There is actually a perfect solution for this called Google Web Toolkit. Who have been trying Google Web Toolkit out? The same guys. For the rest of the group, kind of 1-minute course to Google Web Toolkit. So basically, it's a compiler. It takes your code, your Java-based code, set of UI widgets written by Google, and part of the Java core packages, compiles them together and spits out different JavaScript versions for different browsers. So basically, it compiles your application in browser versions that kind of work around different bugs in browsers. And it's actually quite brilliant. You can have all the benefits of Java language. So basically, the coding is much, much simpler. You can almost forget that you are targeting web because you are coding in Java. You can almost stop debugging JavaScript. Of course, if the compiler for some reason doesn't work correctly, then you are in a really complicated situation debugging the JavaScript. But 99.9% time it just works, and it has become really, really good over the years. But I think the most important value here is that when you're building your software in strongly typed language that's really object-oriented, it's much, much more modular in the end. You can reuse those components and refactor your application and kind of maintain the code base. But you don't have to always go into fat type of clients. You can also do thin client type of thing in top of web. And it's basically keeping those model view and controller on the server side, then reflecting the user interface state in some kind of fashion back to the client side. Different frameworks do it in a different kind of way, but in all the frameworks, the idea is that you're coding on the server side, and the framework somehow moves the UI state to the client side. And the good side is that this part is fully covered by the framework, so you don't have to think about the communication, how you move those things to the client side. You don't have to think about how you're rendering things on the client side. You only build the server side, and you can leave the communication, the client side building to the framework. So you basically get all the benefits of Java as you would in Google Web Toolkit. But also, it's even more simple. You can completely forget about the client side. You can have all the resources, all the power that the server has. And you can even forget about that Ajax thing, kind of asynchronous communication between your user interface and some backend resources. You can actually do most of the things through synchronous calls. Just call a method and expect to get the results back immediately. It's much, much simpler that way if you're comparing to Ajax, where you have to build those handlers for handled response and all the error cases in all the different, every time you are doing some communications back to the server side. It's also quite a bit more flexible. You have all the Java tooling, all the frameworks available. You can actually use any language that runs on top of JVM. So basically that means any language today. And so you could I see more and more Scala and Groovy used for user interface development on the server side. So it's quite interesting because the power of those languages combined with powerful user interface framework like Vaadin, then you can create quite amazing things in really small amount of code. It's more secure. It's more like comparing a white box to black box. In client-side RIA, you are kind of exposing all of your code to anybody who goes to the web page. They can read the code, they can change the code, they can try to kind of figure out what kind of holes you might have on the server side by reading the code. On the server side, all the code you're writing is kept on the server side. Nobody can see it, nobody can read it, and it kind of makes it much, much more secure that way. Bad sides, it's not that scalable. So because you're doing more processing on the server side, it's of course eating more resources from the server. And I think the main resource is server memory. So you are running your user interface in HTTP session on the server side. So everything stored in the user interface eats memory on the server side. While as in client-side RIA, you would be storing the UI state on the browser memory, then that's quite unlimited as there are multiple browsers. The limit is around, by our measurements, around maybe 12,000 concurrent users per front-end server. In this case, we were measuring a ticketing application with Amazon EC2 large servers. So if you would have 3 servers, you could quite happily serve 30,000 concurrent users for your application. So it's probably enough for any kind of enterprise application. It might not be enough if you're building next Twitter or Gmail. So it depends on your use case. One strict kind of limitation is that there is no offline mode. So you always have to be on network because your code is sitting on the server side. You have to go to the server over the network to use your application. But the number one reason for using server-side RIA is the productivity. Development is really, really fast because you can basically leave out half of the code. You don't have to write the client-side or communication layer at all. So you're basically not writing 50% of the UI that you would be in client-side. But if I would be preaching that it's really, really efficient to develop with server-side frameworks, I think that you wouldn't be believing me too well. So in order to make you believe, let's try to code a small application in maybe 15 minutes or so. So what I'm trying to build here is a document management application. Kind of gives you simple UI for browsing through documents, storing them on disk, reading them there, showing them as web pages there, some layout, split panel, resizing everything nicely. Adding some Visific editor capabilities for it, and let's see how it goes in 15 minutes. And I think it's quite important to start from scratch, so we don't do any copy pasting here, and I'm going to make a lot of mistakes, so please help me out. But let's start by creating a new project. So this is just a Vaadin project in Eclipse. We have Eclipse plugin, but you could be using any IDE, and you could actually drop Vaadin into any kind of web project. You don't have to do a specific Vaadin project. Let's call it maybe documents. And we could deploy here as a servlet, but we could also deploy to Google App Engine, or we could deploy as a portlet to different portals. But let's do a servlet. Create the project for us. Yes, please. What just happened? Wow. Okay, maybe we just use Java perspective. So if you look in the project, there is basically a web context directory with just one library, Vaadin library. Everything is one package, so you don't have to have any dependencies. There is one web XML file. This is the only piece of XML you are going to see, and you don't even need this one if you are using a newer Java EE version. But basically, we are just declaring one servlet here. This servlet comes with Vaadin jar file and saying that we want to run this application when user goes to this URL. So really simply launching that servlet. And then we have only one Java file here and no HTML or JavaScript files at all. And this kind of hello world type of application is simply writing in the main window. The main window is the browser window you're going to see. One label, hello Vaadin user, and that's it. So let's run this one. Let's run it in Tomcat. Actually, we could use JRebel to make redeployments a bit faster. Let's rerun it. And it was documents, right? Wow, now we have a demo effect. Let's start again. Debug on server. Okay, great. So now we have kind of hello world application, and what you would expect here is that if I start to modify what's on the screen and save and refresh the browser, it should be kind of changing what I'm doing, but it's not. And the reason here is that it's a stateful application. Everything that I'm doing is stored in the state of the application. So in order to kind of reset the state, I should be restarting the application. So if I restart the application, it shows the new state here. Kind of guarantees that the init method is rerun. So let's start building our application. First of all, we need a bunch of documents, and we could actually use just a bunch of HTML files here for the demo. I have them on my desktop. Of course, in normal case, you would be using JPA and database and so forth, but let's keep it simple first. So we could create a bunch of documents. Let's create them as a file system container. And point that to the file on my desktop. I think it was desktop docs. Like this. So now we should have a data source where we could connect our user interface. And for the user interface, we need some kind of component to select those documents. So let's just use combo box. Let's call it selector. It's a kind of document selector. And point that to the documents on my disk. So basically 2 lines of code, and I could just slap this one on the screen. Like this. And see what's on the web browser. Wow. It's not my day today. What did I do wrong? Oh, yeah. Thank you. So now we have a combo box selecting those documents on the disk, and I can do things like autocomplete here and lazy load the list of documents from the disk, but nothing too fancy yet. So we needed to show that document, and we could show it just on a label like this, and maybe say for the label that we should be using HTML for the documents, because they are just HTML files. And then say that each time when I'm selecting something, I want to fire up one event, and it's just a value change event. here, and oops. And in the event, we want to show that document on the screen. So let's say viewer, set data source, and it's a text file. And the file itself is the value of the selector, which file is selected. So we could ask selector get value, like this. It almost works. The problem here is that because we are still running on the web, and this code is running on the server side, we should be somehow asking to getting those events immediately. So please send those when I'm changing something on the screen. Please send this event back to me on the server side. And for that, we could just say that, oops. Selector set immediate true. So we should be getting the events immediately on the server side. So now when we are going through the documents, oh, maybe we should put that label also on the screen. Like this. So when we are going through the documents here, we should be seeing those on the screen. Quite simple application, but doesn't look like the application we wanted to build. So we had a table here on the beginning of the UI. So let's change this combo box to a table. Actually, one fancy feature of Vaadin is that many of the components share the same interfaces, or implement the same interfaces. So we could just switch these around like this. So we just switch that into table and reload, and now we have a table of components, and it lazy loads nicely and shows different properties for those files. But we cannot select anything here because table is not by default selectable. So we say that, hey, please be selectable. And then we could just go through the files and select these. And it's actually really, really fast, even though it's communicating here between the server and the client. Actually, we could make it a bit nicer. There are some icons. Maybe we could use those also. Set item property, and it's in the file system container. It's an icon like this, and see how it looks like. Doesn't look like too good. Actually, we need a column for icons. Let's add that also. Set row header mode. And we should be showing icons like this. So now we have a bunch of icons for files also. Actually, it's a bit boring because we don't have any folders here. We could change it. This is kind of going to be a different application that I thought of writing, so it's interesting to see how many mistakes there will be. So now we have also folders on whatever I have on my desktop. Or actually, we could even make it a tree table because it's quite flat this way. So let's change this one into tree. Like this, and then we don't need this kind of column here. And now we have kind of fully browsable file browser here, and we can still select the files. But let's layout it a bit. It doesn't lay out too well yet. So we could switch this one, this main layout, to a, let's say, vertical split panel. And now we have a kind of nice split panel around here. Of course, the problem is that the table is not resizing. So we could also ask from the table that please fill up all the space. Set size full. It means like full size for the space given to you. And for that, we are kind of filling the space nicely. OK, my code starts to look like a mess. So we could refactor it a bit. The good thing here, it's just plain Java, so we could just refactor and extract methods and say, maybe this is layout, maybe this one is, let's see, refactor, wire. So our code becomes much cleaner. And this is kind of one of the main benefits of writing everything in Java. You can refactor and move the code around and keep your application quite clean. But yes, we wanted to also edit these documents. So let's add an edit button here somewhere and then create an editor component for ourselves. So new button. By the way, who is following? Only one. And the rest are sleeping. It's not that hard. So where should we put it? Actually, we could change the layout a bit. Let's create, oops. Create a kind of pixel positioned layout for the main window. What the heck I'm doing? Like this, and switch this one here, and then put our split panel within that layout. So it was vertical split panel like this, and add it here. So we are just wrapping around this split panel with an absolute layout. And the result should be that we should have still the same application. Import. So it should be looking the same, yes. And now just add that button that we just created. So let's see. Layout. Our edit button. And we could actually say to the button that we want to put it in the bottom of the screen. Let's say bottom 10 pixels and maybe left 10 pixels, like this. So now we have our edit button here, but it doesn't do much yet. So let's create a component that would be shown on screen when I'm clicking the edit button to edit those documents. And this kind of normal way of programming with Vaadin is to build components that are reusable throughout your application. So let's create a new composite component, call it editor. And this is just a simple Java file that builds the layout and constructs the editor. But the nice thing here is that you can also edit it visually. So you could start adding things on screen. Let's see, maybe we could add a tab sheet here, like this. We could fill it, the whole screen with it. We could maybe move it in the left topmost corner, like this. And add editor here. So let's use the Rix test area here. And we could actually also have a text version for it, and then switch these to fill the space. And maybe also call them like document. And the other one should be also a bit larger. Let's call it HTML. like this. So now we have a component that has 2 tabs, has HTML editor and Visivik editor. And then we could just go and edit this also in Java. So we could change anything here on Java code and go back and forth between the visual version and the Java code. But we could just finish this up with saying we want to edit documents and wire those documents to those editors. So let's see, rich text area. And we want to edit document. And the same for the text area. And then we also could send all those edits immediately back to the server side. Like this. Okay, now we have an editor component that we could use in our application. So just put that on screen. So basically, we just ask our edit button to show that on screen. So new click listener, and when the button is clicked, we could create a new window. Let's say dialog window, and call it editor, and just slap our editor component here. So it was a new editor, and we would be editing the same file that is already shown on screen. So we could get that from viewer component, like this. And then we want to show this on screen. So get this main window, basically our browser, and say that we want to add this new window within the main window. So let's see if it works. We select some document from here and start to edit it, and we get a window. And in this window we can start to edit this file. Let's see, I'll resize the bit to show one thing. So if we edit it here and do something, it actually sends those edits back to the server immediately, shows them in another component that are listening to the same data source, saves those back to the disk, and you can actually connect multiple components to the same data source. So we could go to the HTML mode here and edit it also here. Let's see, something, and it should be syncing up automatically. So this is kind of how it looks like when you're coding in Vaadin or server-side RIA. What do you think? Who could do this kind of coding? I would guess that most of you would be much better than me, because I was doing a lot of mistakes. So how does it actually work? It's kind of a combination of 3 different things. First, there are UI components. One is actually just a library of UI components. So actually, I could show it live. If you go to demovaadin.com, there is a demo called Sampler that shows different kind of components in the product core. You could pick up any of these and show a demo of that component, and then go and read the code, how that demo was written. So you could kind of learn from those components and cut and paste those code snippets to your own application. So it's mostly a component library, but it's also really kind of visually oriented or theme oriented. The kind of normal look and feel of the components is like this. So they are quite kind of business oriented, boring business application type of components. But there is also another theme called Runo here. It's more like Web 2.0 type of theme. So if you want to make a bit more visually appealing application, you could use Runo for it. Or if you want to use your own company colors and such, you could use Chameleon theme. Basically, you could, let's see, take buttons and then choose that, hey, telecom buttons should be red. I don't know if this is correct red, and kind of create theme quite easily. And you can actually, this is just CSS, the CSS editor. You could click here and download a new theme and then change whatever you want to change in that theme with CSS. And if that's not enough, you could go totally custom. Here is just normal components on screen and custom theme that looks like iTunes. I think this is like 250, 300 lines of Java code. So it's quite simple application. Although it doesn't play anything, but it's just kind of mock-up of iTunes. Also, it runs on mobile devices. So I think I even have a demo of that here. Let's see. So to have a good demo, you could go to demo.vaadin.com and see these demos there. But basically, this is a mock-up of Apple's mail application for iPhone. So you can write that kind of application completely in Java, running on the server side, calling back to your whatever Spring layer, what have you on the server side, and still the UI looks quite native. And if you run the same application on iPad, it actually adapts to the iPad UI and looks like iPad application. So you have, instead of filling the whole screen with that menu, you have menu on the left and then kind of emails on the right. And it's just in the beginning of the application asks, hey, if this is an iPhone or if this is an iPad, or is this a kind of desktop browser, and shows correct UI for you. So how it works under the hood is that it combines Google Web Toolkit and server-side RIA concepts together. So all of the UI components in Vaadin, they are basically having two sides. First, there is a Java component, this green one here. It's basically those components that we were using when we were writing that application. They are just plain old Java objects. And for each of those components, there is a kind of peer component on the client side, kind of Google Web Widget component on the client side. And the interesting thing here is that while as the server-side component is just pure Java, and you could use any language that can call Java APIs, on the server side, the client side is also Java. It's written in Google Web Toolkit and compiled to JavaScript. So you kind of delegate all the hard communication stuff and rendering stuff for that client-side component. But the normal way of seeing things is that you are only working on the server side with those Java APIs, and you don't have to worry about those client-side components. Good side, when you are having Google Web Toolkit under the hood, is that then you can write new components quite easily. So basically, to write a new component, you launch up Eclipse Wizard like this, and put your component name there, and it implements those two classes for you automatically, the server-side class and the client-side class. So for the server-side class, you basically declare what kind of API you want to show to your rest of your team who would be using your component, and then you go and implement the rendering part on the client side. Or actually, you could go and use any existing Google Web Toolkit widget for your application and wrap that with Vaadin wrapper, and just you don't have to write that rendering code yourself. Okay, when you have written your component, you can package that with the packaging wizard, and out comes one jar file. So you're basically putting all parts of your component in one package. How it looks, how it behaves on the client side, how it communicates, what kind of API it exposes. Packaging it as jar, and you could then give it to your team members in your project. Or you could upload it online on Vaadin directory. It's basically a kind of library of UI components. It looks like this. So you could go there and grab any of those 200 or so components online, and then put that into your project. So if you are taking one of those, this is actually a good example why you shouldn't put all the components in the product core. It's a layouting component that looks like this, and it wouldn't be too useful in a general sense, but still some applications might be having fun with it. You could also take a look of how it is used, what code looks like, and then either download it into your project or cut and paste Maven definition and put that into POM, and then Maven just automatically downloads and integrates the component for you. But if you just download it and drop that into our Eclipse project under the library directory, then Eclipse is going to detect that, hey, there is a new Vaadin add-on component in our project, and it asks, should I do this one-time Google Web Toolkit compilation to integrate this into our project? And if you say yes, it kind of integrates it automatically, and it's only one time run, and the rest of the time you are just coding in Java without any kind of lengthy Google Web Toolkit compilation phases. Just as an example how that component was used, I'm not sure the code, but it's just 30 lines of code. Basically putting this UI component on screen and then putting normal labels and editor components and what have you within that component. So then you can kind of build really kind of fancy looking HTML5 type of effects without writing all the JavaScript shadow calculations and that kind of stuff yourself. So it's actually quite nice if your team consists of several persons where one of the persons or a couple of persons are really proficient with JavaScript and browsers. They could be the ones who create new components that implement some really browser-specific HTML5 stuff, and the rest of the team can be just Java developers who are using those components, and they don't have to know how they are working within or under the hood. Third thing is that Vaadin-Framework is kind of first-class Java citizen. So it means that you can deploy to anywhere. Basically, any Java servlet container will do. Any portal, any Java portal will do. App Engine is just fine. Or actually, even if you have like PHP application, you could splat your Vaadin application in the middle of that application. Just add one more div into your web page, and Vaadin start to render within existing web page. From a developer tool point of view, there is really good Eclipse integration. We are in the Maven main repository, and we have a repository for all the add-on components. You could use NetBeans, or actually you could use any IDE, as this is just one jar file you are dropping into your project. And there is a quite interesting Spring Root integration. Actually, how many of you have been using Spring Root? How many of you know what is Spring Root? Half. So it's kind of assistant that sits beside you when you are coding and looking what you are doing and writing some things for you automatically. So let's say you write a new property in your Java code, it writes setters and getters for you automatically, or it could persist your application automatically. Or then you can have like live conversation with Root and ask Root to do things for you. So this is something like this. So let's first create a new Maven project. So this is a pizza shop project, so basically application for selling pizzas. And then we can start conversation with Root. We are asking it, hey, Root, please create the persistence layer for us. We would like to use Hibernate. We would like to use this hypersonic in-memory database for it. And Root creates all the configuration files and Java code for you. And then you could just ask it to do entities, like topping entity with the name property or pizza entity with toppings and so forth. You could actually go and write those in Java by hand, and Root would automatically add those to your data layer. But you could also ask Root to write Java code for you like this. So after these commands, you actually have application with the data model that is working and two entities in the data model. It writes a bunch of code files for you. And these are just normal entities with some Root annotations that kind of instruct Root what kind of extra functionality you would like to have in those entities. But you could also ask Root, hey, please create a Vaadin application for us. So it should be called pizza shop, and then generate for each entity some kind of CRUD view for us. So two commands, and then Root goes and creates a bit more Java files. And as an end result, you get this kind of Vaadin application where you could go through pizzas, create new pizzas, add toppings for them, and so forth. But the interesting thing here is that you could actually customize this application, of course, by coding in Java, but you could also use Visual Editor for kind of changing the look and feel, and this all the time keeps it in sync with true. Or you could add more fields to your data model later, and those could be just added to the UI layer as well. And end result would be looking something like this. So how to get started with Vaadin? First of all, you could go to vaadin.com. There is a quite extensive developer portal for it, a lot of tutorials and examples and wiki articles and stuff online. There is a whole book about Vaadin called Book of Vaadin. We actually have, I think, 6 copies or 7 copies, so if you are fast, you can grab a copy from here. If you are not fast, there is also an online copy as a PDF or EPUB or HTML or almost any kind of format, so you can grab it there and read on iPad or something. Also, there is a really nice ref card for kind of showing the basis of Vaadin. Look like this. There is also a bunch of copies for this, and this is also available online. There is at least this class diagram showing all the core components might be quite useful while coding with Vaadin. And we have really active community. We are getting something like 80,000 developers to visit Vaadin.com monthly, and the discussion is really lively on the forums. So if you have any kind of questions, just go to forums and ask, and they will be helping you. So, any questions or comments? Yes? Yes.
I think that it's running on a Apache Informcat.
Yes, anything that can run Java. So it is only requiring a servlet or portlet APIs. So you can have any Java web server and run it there.
Is there any announcement for which kind of IBM web server?
Yeah, I don't remember the version numbers by heart, but you could go to vaadin.com/features and you have a list of all the supported platforms.
And do you also support WebSeal? This is a combination with from IBM.
Sorry?
WebSeal.
I don't know.
This is a security interface above IBM WebSphere.
Yes, unfortunately, I don't know.
Okay, don't worry.
Any other questions?
Yes.
You told us that one good platform would be Google App Engine.
Yes.
And the example you showed us was this file browser, but can I use any component, or what restrictions are there to use Vaadin on Google App Engine?
There are quite a few. Google App Engine, it sets a lot of different restrictions, what kind of things you can do. For example, you cannot leave background threads running there and such restrictions. But there are just normal restrictions that apply to all Google App Engine applications, regardless what the UI layer might be. So basically all the restrictions for Google App Engine apply also for Vaadin applications running there.
Other questions? I would have a question.
Yeah.
You're compiling the Java code on the server side on demand. So any optimizations done on the Vaadin to cache, for example, the compiled code?
So what I was doing, it was normal Java code on the server side. So we weren't touching at all the client-side code. So that client-side code was pre-compiled with Google Web Toolkit. So basically it was shipping in Vaadin jar file, and we didn't have to even compile it once. So not too many kind of, what kind of optimizations you mean for server-side compilation? So do you mean that what kind of compilation we are doing on the server side for? In the demo I was using JRebel, so it's a kind of library that loads Java classes on fly and kind of switches those classes without redeploying the whole application. And it kind of makes the development process quite a bit smoother than kind of having to restart the whole application each time you're making code changes on the server side.
Okay, thanks. Other questions?
Can you highlight or describe how you get access to your context for your web context? So for instance, user authentication or request URLs and things like that?
Yeah, so you could get, in Vaadin application class, ask get context. And it's kind of generic context because we are supporting portlets and servlets as well. So you have to typecast it into a web context, a web application context. And from that application context, you can get into any servlet type of things.
Could you please comment on the bandwidth consumption of the two different RIA models, the fat client and the thin client model?
That's actually a really good question. So to put it other way, how chatty is Vaadin? It depends on your application. So in Vaadin, basically, if you remember from the demo, there was that set immediate. So we were kind of controlling, should we go back to the server side with this property change or not? Quite often we have to go back to the server side. So quite many of those changes go back to the server side and fetch some kind of ask server what has changed on screen. And the good side is that this communication is really, really lightweight. So what goes back to the server side is maybe 100 or so bytes, basically describing which kind of events has happened on the client side. And back comes a bit of JSON, and this JSON only describes which parts of the screen has changed and in a logical manner. So all the kind of how it looks and feels and behaves, that kind of stuff is left for the client side. So those messages are really, really lightweight. When you're comparing that to the client-side RIA, there you have to implement the communication yourself. So you are more in control. You can choose when to go back to the server side with more control. But it actually ends in such situation that you could be wiring different components separately for different data sources on the server side. So if you're doing something on the client side, let's say you change one tab on the client side, it might kind of trigger multiple AJAX calls back to the server side in client-side RIA mode. So if you are not careful, you can be even more chatty in the client-side RIA, but the good side is that you are in control, and most of the time you are less chatty than Vaadin. In practice, it's really usable even through quite bad networks. So maybe we could do a live demo. I don't know how the network works here. This server is running in US, so all the messages and access are going back and forth between Germany and US. And if we go like really, really fast through this application, all those events went back and forth between Germany and US, and it's really, really responsive. And it kind of does optimizations like if I go through these menus like this, and when I'm raising my finger, then it sends the event to the server side. So there are a bunch of different optimizations done, and it kind of guarantees that for each user interaction there is at most one event that is going back to the server side. So in some cases it's less chatty than the client side RIA.
Still feels good when the latency is high.
If the latency is really, really high, then it starts to feel slower. So I have been using work hours application from Airplane in US, and then the latency is like, I think, 3 seconds for each packet. But even in that case, it was quite usable. And if you are using any kind of client-side RIA application, it also have to go to the server side to fetch those data. So in practice, it might not be any faster.
Possible to run a mixed application with native or pure GUID on the client side and some server containers in Vaadin, because I think that could tackle with the latency and round trip issues too. Yeah, if you have high latency, you could use plain GUID for this part of the application and Vaadin for the other. Yeah. Would
yes, this is fully possible. So my kind of advice is first write everything in Vaadin, and if there are some latency issues, you would be doing like some really interactive thing like using mouse drag events for something, for example, then you could optimize later and move that part to the client side, because everything in Vaadin that is rendered on the screen goes through Google Web Toolkit anyways, so it's quite easy to do parts in Google Web Toolkit together with Vaadin. It's kind of a combination of client-side and server-side RIA. You can choose which model you are using.
Follow up, could you give us a very little deep dive into integrating client-side GUID and Vaadin?
So, unfortunately, I don't have a demo prepared, but I could kind of show a quick overview. So basically, I could write a new client-side component called Vaadin widget. I could say that this is our optimized data entry field component. And what actually happens is that it writes, I'll close this down. So it basically writes two files for you. Optimized data entry field. This is the server-side part, and basically there are two things. First, there is a method called paint content. This is kind of method that describes the visual state of the component. And then there is change variables method that receives events from the client side, which variables have changed on the client side. So just those two methods are needed on the server side. Of course, in addition to these, you would want to write your own API here that you want to expose to your users. On the client side, there is one Java file. So this is actually extending a widget. This is a Google Web Toolkit widget. And it could be extending any existing Google Web Toolkit widget. So it could be like Google Maps, and then you could be writing your code on top of Google Maps. And there is only one kind of additional method on the client side that you have to add to Google widget, and this is called update from UIDL. Update from the user interface definition language. So this receives all those user interface states from that paint content method that you were writing on the server side, and puts that state on the screen. And whenever something happens, you could just send that message back to the server side. And let's see if I have an example here. Saying update variable. It means that whatever I'm saying here goes back to the change variables methods on the server side. So basically 4 different methods that handle the communication and the rendering, and you just fill these up, and then you have a client-side component.
So is it possible to leave more windows open like an MDI?
Yes. So you mean like windows within windows? Yes. Yeah. So you could just open a model window here or non-model window, and you could play around these, or you could even do it. Let's see. Do a portal-like layouts, like, let's see, this one was a really cool component. So you could have like multiple portal components here, and each of these are filled with Vaadin components, and you could drag these around and play video. This is actually the developer who has written this. Oops. Yeah, other questions?
Okay. Is it possible to write a multi-user application where we have multiple users modifying the model and see the other users these changes in time?
Yes. So because this is running on the server side, any kind of communication that you can do on the server side between, and then it becomes a question how it gets back to the screen, because in normal operation mode, Vaadin is just doing HR requests back to the server side when user does something. And there are multiple ways for that. You could, for example, enable polling, say to your application that you should go to the server to check if there are anything changed in the model, let's say once 5 seconds. Or you could use one of those push add-ons for Vaadin that keep the connection open between browser and the server and pushes any changes to the model immediately back to the screen. So you could build like chat application really, really easily, or kind of shared calendar application.
Back to the MDI, the portal layout.
Yes.
The developer already defines the number of internal windows. I was thinking about the client user.
Yes.
Has a menu point and open Windows 1, and then he opened Windows 2 and compare different things and closing one or not. Like an usual MDI application on a desktop world.
Yes, yes, sure. So I think even our weren't even this one such. So we could open this document multiple times and edit these.
Okay.
Something like this. Really good question. Let's see, I don't know. So we put document 1. They should be in sync. And then we could do some change here, and it kind of updates everywhere. And if we would be kind of using the same model for different users from different browsers, it would be pushing those changes immediately back to those users.
So what's coming in Vaadin 7, 8, and 9?
Quite a question. The best answer is here online. So if you go to Vaadin blog, there is a blog post that I wrote some days ago that kind of explains the summary of what's happening with Vaadin 7. This is a really large project. So we have 3 major themes here. We want to kind of open more to the developers. Vaadin is kind of, today Vaadin has 3 layers of abstraction. Basically, abstraction on the server side. You are writing code on the server side. If you really want to, you can go through that abstraction to the client side, write your code in Java on the client side with Google Web Toolkit. If you really want to go through that abstraction, you could write code in JavaScript on the server, on the client side. So 3 different abstraction layers. But it's not too easy always to go through those abstraction layers, or it could be easier. And with Vaadin 7, we want to kind of make it much, much easier to go through abstraction and choose which level you're coding to. Kind of practical example, you were asking from the back row how to get connection to the web application context. You had to cast that into web application context because we are kind of supporting all kinds of terminal. In Vaadin 7, there is a direct access for that, so you don't have to kind of dig up from the API which class you should be casting this application context to. So like small changes there. We have been really, really happy with the decision of strongly supporting add-on components in Vaadin. Basically, we started that support maybe 1.5 years ago, and then directly have exactly 0 components. And today, I think it has something like 217 components contributed by the community. So it has been great success, and we want to kind of embrace that success and open more extension points for Vaadin to make it easier to kind of create new kinds of add-ons, like wrapping existing JavaScript components easily without even touching Google Web Toolkit layer at all, or doing new kind of push add-ons, or there are multiple ways of extending Vaadin, or could be even more ways of extending Vaadin. The third thing is cleaning up. The current version of Vaadin originates from year 2002. So basically, when I started the project in year 2000, we did 2 complete rewrites and ended up with the current APIs in 2002. And since that point of time, we have been supporting the same APIs for now 8 years or so. So there are some things that we want to get rid of, and we want to clean those up in Vaadin 7. So this is what is coming with Vaadin 7. It should be out in 11 months or so, and the first alpha version should be out by Christmas, and the most kind of, I would say, radical changes should be in that first alpha version. So if you are using Vaadin 6 today, you might want to check it out and complain on the forums if something is broken or it's not good for something. So some of your use cases.
Okay, thanks. Other questions?
Can we make use of some Spring or Java EE features like dependency injection?
Yes. This is plain Java on the server side. So dependency injection is quite straightforward. There is actually one add-on you should be taking a look at. Oh, actually, this is for the pure CDI, but yes, you can also inject with Spring.
Maybe just another question. What's your business model?
We are selling a few things. We are selling support for companies who are using Vaadin. The support package is called Pro account. So this is basically normal support channel, and oops, quite a layout here. Something just happened. Okay, anyways, it's a support channel and also a bunch of kind of tools that you could speed up development, like there is a regression testing tool where you could record all the UI interactions, store them as JUnit tests, and run them with your continuous integration tests. So that kind of stuff. And we are also selling professional services, so basically helping out those companies who are building Vaadin application, either maybe training or building some UI components for those projects, or even outsourcing some part of the project for our team.
Any other questions? Not for the moment? But I think a warm thanks to Joonas for this exciting presentation. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.
And from our side, thank you in something to drink for a good evening today. So thank you all for coming here to the Tech Talk. So we now have some snacks and some beer in the background. So feel free to help yourself. And I wish you the best and have a good talks between you, and together with Joonas. I think you will be here for some minutes.
Yeah, and actually there's also another guy from Vaadin team, Ville, who will be helping with any kind of questions.
Okay, so thank you very much, and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. And also there are a couple of these books if you want to have a copy. Let's see.